Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
We do have the chairs kind of set up like, it feels like a classroom. It's like, I feel like I have to actually teach, but I'm hoping that we'll have more discussion today than just teaching. So, and I'm also like, hey, maybe we've got a shot at making it all the way through the Torah portion, because it's only one chapter.
I know.
It's like, maybe we've got a chance. We'll see. It's always difficult. But I like this portion. So this portion is actually, well, let me pray, and then we'll get started. So Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for Shabbat, Lord. We thank you for a day of rest, Lord. We thank you for the opportunity to study your word together. We thank you for just time to slow down and to stop and think a little bit, Lord. I just ask that your presence would be with us. I ask that you would be present in the conversation, that you would help us to make the connections that you want us to make, and that it would just be an edifying discussion for everyone in the room, Lord, and anyone watching. B'Shem Yeshua, Amen.
Did you hear me giggle? I saw something. I saw heaven. They pulled back or peeled back. And they're listening.
Oh,
they're
okay.
watching. That was so cool.
Oh,
now
wow.
when you say be here in our present conversation, it's like,
He is. Praise the Lord.
They're watching.
Praise the Lord.
That's
a good thing.
That all day.
No, that's great. I love that. That's great. So this is a short portion, one chapter. The one before was only was about a chapter and a half. So in many years, the one before this, last week's portion and this week's portion are together. These are often doubled when we have double portions, but this is one of the rare years when we get a week for each of them. So it's a short portion. We're kind of nearing the end of Deuteronomy and the end of the Torah, and we'll get ready to circle back around here in a couple of weeks. So this chapter, or this portion, Deuteronomy 31, really kind of is the beginning of the end of Deuteronomy. It's kind of the beginning of the epilogue. 31 through 34 are kind of these ending chapters, the end of Moses' life. And as I was reading through this chapter, I read through it a few times this week. And as I was reading through it, I kind of, different things kept coming to mind of just like connecting back to, oh, this is making me think of X, Y, and Z, all that we've already come through in the Torah, and, oh, this is making me think of what's to come. So that's really kind of what I wanted to just talk through. I kind of just wanted to work our way through, and I kind of just went through, somehow I ended up with 3 pages of, this is what this thing makes me think of, going through, and a couple of other notes, because of course I was reading a couple commentaries too, because that's what I do. But just to kind of see, because I think that that's kind of the purpose of this. I think that that's what Moses is kind of trying to do at the end of his life. He's trying to be like, kind of trying to set them up. I kind of at one point I was like, he sounds a little bit like a father sending his kid off to college. Now remember to do this, and remember that, and remember this, because this is going to happen, and like he's like trying to, pass on every last little bit before he kind of sends them off on their own. And he, of course he's going to pass away, but not go with them. But that's kind of the feel that I kind of got from it as I was going. So we'll kind of just go through bit by bit, and I can share the things that I kind of saw, but if there's things that it brings to mind, I'm sure there are more than what I thought of, and we'll just kind of go through that way. Okay, so Deuteronomy 31, we'll just do kind of paragraphs, so 1 through 3. It says, Then Moses went up and spoke these words to all Israel, and he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I am no longer able to go out and come in. Adonai has said to me, you are not to cross over this Jordan. Adonai your God, he will cross over before you. He will destroy these nations from before you, and you will dispossess them. Joshua will cross over before you just as Adonai has promised. Okay, so the 120 years.
Was it his birthday?
Was it his birthday? Maybe.
It said today.
Maybe. I'm 120 years old. So maybe. Very possible. Very possible. I hadn't really thought about that it was his birthday, but I think that's possible. What is the 120 years? Does that make you think of anything? Think way back to the beginning of the Torah. Genesis 6.
Oh, Genesis 6.
You remember?
No.
So right before,
Lay it on us.
So right before, in Genesis 6, I didn't write down the verse.
3.
Yep. So this is when, everything is evil, the world is terrible, right before he kind of tells Moses to go, or Moses, Noah, to go into the ark. He says, my spirit will only dwell with man 120 years. Because, of course, before that we have lives of hundreds of years, right? And he cuts it off. He's like, nope, 120 years, that's all you get. So
that's truncated, huh?
So, which is interesting because many people think that that he does that because since they're not in the garden, the assumption is, had Adam and Eve not eaten the fruit and people had continued to live in the garden, there would be no death. Because they would be able to continue eating of the tree of life, right? Mm-hmm. Remember, in the middle we have the tree of life and we have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They eat of the tree of knowledge, which essentially cancels out their ability to eat from the tree of life. So that's when death comes into the picture, is when they eat from that tree of knowledge. So the assumption is that if had they not eaten of that tree, they would have never died. There would be no death, which is a very interesting thing. Interesting, wraparound connection to the end of the story where we know there's no more death when we have new heavens, new earth, new Jerusalem. But what was my point? Oh, my point was, so they eat of the tree of knowledge, and basically the possibility of death comes into existence. And but they lived for a very long time at that time. And so there's one school of thought that thinks that because it seems that, unfortunately, with the knowledge of good and evil, mankind is going to eventually lean toward the evil side. And so shortening a lifespan shortens the length of evil. And you eventually don't, if you have people dying off, of course you also have people being born. But it's the idea in some thought, in Jewish thought, is that there's less evil if people die after 120 years rather than living 900 years. I don't know. You can accept or reject or just think, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
But the point is, here, Moses is living 120 years. God said that his spirit would dwell with them would only be with them for 120 years. So the point is, what we can kind of deduce from this is that Moses lived the full life. God's spirit dwelt with him the full 120 years, which is great. We don't have a lot of those stories. There's not a lot of those people in the Bible that we have that full span. And it also says that he's no longer able to go out and come in.
Which means?
Do you have an idea?
No, I want to hear what your idea is.
Well, I have two.
Okay.
One, it actually it makes me think of the Shema, like the continuing on of the Shema, like the word be upon your heart when you go out, when you come in. That triggered in my brain. But it seems it's actually a military issue. He's no longer able to lead a military conquest, which, because this is, of course, paired with Joshua about to take over. When you think of Joshua, you think what? You think military commander. His job is go in and conquer the land, right? And so the idea, so that's kind of what I see. Do you have another idea?
Well, now, when I first read it, the only thing that I was kind of kicking around is when we would see many of the, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, when they got older, they kind of became feeble, and they had to have help coming, and whether it was blindness or whatever.
So at first, when he said, I'm no longer able to go out or come in, I started thinking like without help, because I'm 120 years old.
Sure.
But that's why I was kind of wondering if there was a different.
Well, I think that's
verbiage to
probably
that.
part of it too. I mean, that would be part of it. The point is, yeah, he's not capable.
He's not capable.
Basically, he's probably not physically capable of fulfilling the role that he's had, which would include all kinds of things. Probably, you know, service in the tabernacle, leading the people. It's a physically taxing job. So yeah, it seems that he's not able to do that. And again, in verse 3, he mentions Joshua, that so really Joshua comes up a lot in this chapter, in this one chapter. So we've got one here that it's just kind of this, yes, we already know that Joshua is gonna be leading the people, but it's reaffirmed a lot of times in this. Anything else in verses 1 through 3?
Well, it's telling them though that it's actually Adonai that's going or crossing over, and it's Adonai that's destroying it. Yeah, Joshua, I'm going to use Joshua, but I think he's reiterating to the people again that Adonai is going to do this for you though, so that they're not just putting their trust in a new man or a new leader that way.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good. I think we see that pairing several times in this chapter too. We see that Adonai is going before you. Adonai is going to, you know, conquer the land, but Joshua's going to be your leader.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about it, that's why Joshua's the leader, right? Because when they went in as the spies, he and Caleb were the only ones who came back and said, yeah, there's giants, but our God is like, but Adonai can do this. Adonai can conquer. So that's kind of, it's interesting. Yeah, we see that pairing, but that's really why he's the leader, is because he is the one who believed, yes, Adonai can do this. Okay, so let's look at 4 through 6. So Adonai,
I got one more. So Joshua or close to Yeshua crosses over before you, so you could kind of use that in like present day context, couldn't you, and say,
you could. I mean, I think that there's kind of a shadow, an image of someone going before, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along, because there's a couple really interesting things that are said.
okay.
Continuing to go on. So yes, Joshua and Yeshua, they are similar names, and even in the Hebrew. But I think that we can see characteristics of Yeshua in Moses, in Joshua, as you go on through. But to fully make them Messiah figures, I think is a little bit. So yes, there's a foreshadowing for sure. Yes, there's a looking toward the messianic reality for sure. So just how much we put that on that, which is with Joshua is an interesting one. We'll as we continue to see the references to Joshua, we'll talk about it a little more. Okay, so 4 through 6. So Adonai will do to them just as he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, into their land when he destroyed them. Adonai will give them over to you, and you are to do to them according to all the mitzvot that I commanded you. Chazak, be courageous, do not be afraid or tremble before them. For Adonai your God, he is the one who goes with you. He will not fail or abandon you. Okay. So we have this this chazak, this be strong, be courageous, which we usually associate with Joshua, and usually we quote it from Joshua 1:9, I think. But we see it here, and who is he talking to? All of Israel. So this section is he's still addressing all the people. But this is very much as like he's giving this kind of final exhortation of remember everything that God has done. Remember how he's already, these times you've already seen him overcome, and know that he is going, again, he says he goes with you and he goes before you. He will not fail or abandon you. So he's reminding them again that he's still there. and in the midst of that is the remindment to keep the commandments, right? Because that's kind of, in this Mosaic covenant world, having just been given the Torah, but they've now been given the Torah, I guess, that doing the commandments is helping to cultivate this reality that God's presence will dwell among them. So these kind of go hand in hand. Anything else in these verses?
So could you, because this emphasis, it says in Deuteronomy 31, 3 times, be strong and good courage, and then 3 times in Joshua 1. Do you think this is what contributed to the Jews being convinced that when Yeshua came that he was going to be a conquering king? And then the flip side of overemphasis of the suffering servant that you could say of Christianity, and how because he's already came as the suffering servant, now he's going to come as the conquering king, and yet not in the way that we traditionally think of a conquering king, but a lot of it has to do with strength and courage. And so I think this is a very applicable word to where the church finds itself today, and that's probably has something to do with the Jews being spurred to jealousy at some point too, is the strength and courage that he's looking to impart into us if we can see this in a present context. Is that a stretch?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely part of it. I think that, I think this is kind of the, I think if we look back to, so this is really where the, be strong, have courage, that kind of, I don't know, tagline, if you will, kind of starts to catch on. But really, it's about this, but really, why, be strong and have courage unto what? Unto knowing that the Adonai your God goes before you, that he's Adonai Tzabaoth, that he does go before you, because he's already demonstrated that, and he will continue.
Right.
So I think it's just, I think it's a continuation more than a new revelation at this point.
Sure.
Because he's already, he delivered them out of Israel. He, defeated the Egyptians. He's provided for them. We've, defeating the Amorites. I think we've seen him demonstrate that. And so I think the issue here is really more that Moses has been this very unique prophet or figure up to this point, that he has kind of had this direct revelation from God to then speak to the people, and they're no longer going to have that. Even though we have this kind of blessing of Joshua to be the next leader, he's not, and even if, and we can talk about this a little bit more too in a little bit, but even at the end of the Torah, it says there's never been a prophet like Moses. And so I think the idea that what's happening here and in Joshua 1 is it's this reassurance. It's like, no, God hasn't left you. Moses isn't here, but God hasn't left you. And so again, yes, I think there's some foreshadowing of the conquering king reality of Yeshua. But I think the issue here is more that they no longer have this prophet that's speaking to God face to face. And they have to then figure out how to, as a people, how to continue to live as the people God called them to be, which involves keeping his commandments and following the order that God has established at this point. And yes, there's military conquest, but I don't know that I think that that's actually fully the focus of this commandment at this point. But that's kind of my take on it a little bit. Anything else in this section?
Isn't there like a shift going on also, that the people of Israel are getting established as a nation, but they've been completely reliant upon Moses to hear, God to lead them. They haven't really had to do anything for themselves as far as, well, you gotta get your own, you gotta go get the manna, but even the manna was, so everything was pretty much provided for them. And I've never seen this before, this shift, but now you've got Joshua, now they've gotta go in and conquer it and take the land. So I guess the parallel is, we grow up and we get, as personally, the Lord just gives us everything we need, he raises up with, but there comes a point where we
in our faith and in our lives have to actually take the responsibility to go out and conquer or do whatever it is that we're going to do. And it is like fighting, and you do feel like you're like, oh my gosh, I'm exerting myself. Is this okay?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is that I never saw that shift before, but the whole shift is now going. They're going to go take the land. They're getting rid of the evil guys. And they have to have God's power and strength to do it.
Yeah.
So how do you rely on that when you really haven't had to do that by yourself before?
Yeah, I think that's true, because I think there's definitely this shift going on here of like, I mean, looking back, hindsight's 20/20, right? Like looking back, we're like, it's way easier when Moses is there and he just goes into the tent and speaks directly to God, and then he tells them what to do, and they're like, we're going to do this, except they're not very good at doing what God says.
Right, exactly.
We can all relate to that.
Yes.
But I think there is this shift here of like, yes, they had this one who could go directly into the presence, and now they have to, now it's like, and I think that's, again, back to like, I think that's what Moses is kind of exhorting them, is like, okay, he's given you the structure. He's given you the commandments about, the service in the tabernacle. He's given you the structure about how you live and move. He's given you all these commandments. And not that commandments, not that we look at those, these are your rules to follow. It's exhaustive, but actually I've been reading about this week for this class. It's like the idea is that it passes on wisdom. Like these examples that it gives is like, this is how God sees things, and as you learn and as you are in relationship with God, you start to learn his character and learn his wisdom, so that you can apply that to these situations. And really it's like, yeah, in this situation it's like, okay, well now it's time to do that. Like he's kind of given you the framework and the structure, and now you have to live in it. Now it's your responsibility to be faithful and obedient and have fear of the Lord without Moses, this person standing in front of you who can speak the word of God to you, basically, at this point. So it's a big deal. And yeah, and along with that, they all now have to go in and conquer all these people living in the land that God has promised them, because God promised the land was theirs, but he didn't like put a fence around it and keep all the people out. There's a lot of people living there, and that's, as we know, an ongoing issue. Yeah.
So even with the be strong and courageous, like from a practical note, like when you began and you said, it's kind of like Moses, it's like, I'm sending my kids out now, type of thing. On that flip side, okay, so we've hit this 120 years. The people know this is it. I mean, he's getting ready to set somebody up. It's almost like when a parent dies and you have this really good relationship, and let's say that parent's been your support system, and when things have gone wrong, this is the person you can bounce this off, or this is the person that kind of fixes your issues for you, or sets you on balance. And I mean, I know people that they've lost their parents, and this is a huge gap, and it freaks them out. I don't have this person anymore. And it's almost like this is setting them up on that type of reality too, that in a sense Israel could be kind of going, we're losing our dad or our grandpa, since it's the next generation. Here, he's always been like this sound wisdom person, and I kind of feel like this whole setup on that too is him kind of going, okay, yeah, I'm going to go away, be strong, be courageous. Adonai's still with you. Right. Joshua's going to take care of this for you. But I do feel like there's like this heart reach out to them of realizing that there is going to be this grief that's going to go down when he's gone, even though they battled against him half the time, or at least their parents did.
Yeah.
Kind of like FDR.
But he's kind of like that. Also, is the setup. So he's trying to prepare them, but he's also trying to encourage them that it's gonna be okay.
Right. Because the truth is, yes, Moses is kind of this mediator, but it's really God.
It's God
who's leading them, and he's trying to help them see that. That's really good.
Yeshua does the same thing. He's here he pours his life in for the 3 years, fulfills everything in 3 years, and then he goes away and leaves and says, okay, just hang on, guys, wait for and he was with them for 40 days after we forget that part sometimes, the resurrection. So he's really pouring everything into them, and then he leaves, and he says, but just wait the Comforter's gonna come, and of course, when the outpouring happens, I mean, look what totally transforms the whole world over the next century. I've just never seen that parallel
Mhm.
before, but it's,
Mhm.
does God do that in our lives all the time or what?
Mhm.
Parents go, bye, you know? And then it's our turn.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. Cause we're still gonna we're gonna make it through the whole chapter, guys.
We are.
We can do it. All right, 7 and 8. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong, be courageous, for you are to go with this people into the land Adonai has sworn to their fathers to give them. And you are to enable them to inherit it. Adonai, he is the one who goes before you, and he will be with you. He will not fail you or abandon you. Do not fear or be discouraged. It seems that being strong and courageous and knowing that Adonai is going with them is important. We have it again. But this time it's specifically to Joshua. So this is Moses before all the people, but specifically this is instruction to Joshua. So yeah, and this he is the one who goes before you is kind of this looking back to the Exodus, right? The Adonai is the one who goes before you to lead you out of Egypt, and so it's kind of this. He has been that one who goes before you, and he's going to continue to be that one who goes before you. Okay, you can stop me if you want to, but I'm going to keep going because this next section is good. I mean, it's all good, but all right, let's do 9. Look at 9 through 13. Moses wrote down this Torah and gave it to the Kohanim, the sons of Levi, who carried the Ark of the Covenant of Adonai, and to all the elders of Israel. And Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the set time of the year of canceling debts during the feast of Sukkot, when all Israel comes to appear before Adonai your God in the place he chooses, you are to read this Torah before them in their hearing. Gather the people, the men and the women and the little ones, and the outsider within your town gates, so they may hear and so they may learn, and they will fear Adonai your God and take care to do all the words of this Torah. So their children who have not known will hear and learn to fear Adonai your God all the days you live on the land you are about to cross over the Jordan to possess. All right. So, all right. So in verse 9, we have the record, this is to be the written Torah. It's to go, with the ark, basically, which is, it's pretty important. And what's the purpose of the ark and the things that are in the ark?
Keep them safe.
To keep them safe, but how do they actually, what's their purpose for the people?
Oh, right.
They're a sign and they're reminders, right? They're, and granted, their people are probably not seeing all of these things all the time. They're closed up and in the Holy of Holies, whatever, but they know that they're there, and so they're reminders, right? They're reminders of these really important events and things, and so basically this is kind of like this is really important. It's going in the center of everything. It's really important. So then we have this interesting instruction about reading the Torah before the people every 7 years during Sukkot. Fitting that we're reading this as we're, about to celebrate Sukkot in a week and a half. So I think our Sukkot celebration should be we stand and read the whole Torah, which many understand to be the book of Deuteronomy specifically, but
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So that's how Jewish commentators say it, is that it's referring to this book of Deuteronomy. Sure, I don't know. So should that be our Sukkot celebration? Should we stand and read, and Rich can read the book of Deuteronomy to us? I think that would be fun.
Over
Anyway.
the 7 days, maybe.
Over 7 days.
Over 7 days.
Yeah.
You can give a glass of water.
Give him a glass of water. We'll let you stay hydrated. We'll trade off with people maybe.
If you did it to a song, then we could dance to it.
That's
true.
There you go. That's what we should do. We should set music to the whole book of Deuteronomy. We should just dance to that. That would be
There
funny.
you go.
Anyway. I'm kidding, but I'm being kind of silly. But the interesting, okay. Back to what it says. So every 7 years. So every 7 years, of course, is the Sabbath year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the land is going to lie fallow. So during Sukkot, going into, of the Sabbath year, the harvests are done. So that means, what does that mean? If no one needs to be out harvesting and planting, that means everyone's available.
Right.
It means they can all come. So that's what, even goes through all your men, your women, their children, the outsider within your gates, the nation. It's a lot of us. Thank you, Lord. And so, but everyone's available. Everyone can come to hear the reading of the Torah.
Right.
Which is, we think, why it specifies every 7 year, why they don't do it every year, is because every 7 years, you get everyone. So it's important, clearly, that everyone hears the word, so that everyone knows, because again, this is the idea, is that this is how they continue to have God's presence with them, is they need to know the word. It's a very oral culture still at this time, so most people are gonna, it's one, cost prohibitive for everyone to have a copy of the scroll at the time, and also depending on literacy rates and all that kind of stuff. So they need to come and they need to hear it. They need to have the opportunity to hear it. Not that they wouldn't hear it throughout the year also. But it's interesting that God even sets up the calendar so that every 7 years, everyone's available to come and hear the word. He doesn't leave out many details. And this is actually also where we kind of get it's kind of understood that the Torah cycle that we kind of now have is kind of adapted from this. They had it, every 7 years, and now we read the Torah through every year, separated out into course, and we do the whole 5 books of Moses. But this is kind of the idea is that this is kind of the root of that practice. So that's kind of a fun connection as well. So also all the people, let me see, verse 12. So gathering all the people, so they would all be coming and gathering around, does it say it right here? Maybe it's not in this verse, hold on. In the place he chooses, yes, I was looking at the wrong verse. So in verse 11 it says that you're to come to the place where he chooses. What's the place that he chooses?
Well, now it's Jerusalem.
Now it would be Jerusalem.
Oh.
So work backwards. Why is it Jerusalem? Because that's the city he set up, where the temple eventually was, right? So work backward. Before the temple was in Jerusalem, where would it have been?
Wherever the Ark of the Covenant.
Wherever the ark was, which for 400 years, I won't say entered the land for 400 years before it moved to Jerusalem, was in Shiloh. So, so around the tabernacle or on the ark, right, is the point. And yes, ultimately the place that he chooses is certainly Jerusalem. They just have a little bit of a longer journey before they ultimately get there. So they come, but they are gathering around the ark basically for this hearing, and it's like this gather of people, and if you think back to when we talked about the setup of the tabernacle and the structure of the tabernacle, what is the tabernacle kind of the image of, or the pattern of? Heaven on earth, but it's patterned after what experience that Moses had?
Oh.
Throne room?
Sinai. Remember, because we kind of talked about the mountain having these 3 sections and then the tabernacle having these 3 sections. So this is kind of all the people coming up, and all the people went up to Sinai. They didn't go up the mountain, but they all gathered, right? Huh? The outer court. Mm-hmm. And so, so this coming up to gather around and hear the word is kind of this mirror back, or this kind of image of this Sinai experience as well. I like to see all these themes because I think seeing the consistency of the Lord is really encouraging to me. That he just seeing the way that he uses these patterns all over again, and these things that remind back to previous experiences, and then ultimately look forward. Like I said, we're kind of talking a little bit more of the experiences that came before, but we could easily go forward as well. I think that that's really encouraging to me, because especially with whether we realize it or not, and we're not going to chase this rabbit all the way down the trail, I promise, but of all this talk of replacement theology, and God had to come up with a new plan, even back to the garden of they sinned, and oh man, he's got to have a new plan. He knew, guys. God is not ever surprised by these things that happen, right? And so it's like, and even like, and then even the rejection of Israel and the Jewish people being replaced with the church, it's like no, he's consistent.
Right.
The Lord is very consistent, and so I like seeing those things. That's why I'm so careful to point them out when I see them, because I think to see the consistency of the Lord, and yes, it's constantly pushing the narrative forward, but he doesn't tend to replace things. So I think that we need to remember that part of his character is to continue, is to be consistent and push a narrative forward, but not to replace and replace and redo the story in some sense. I don't know. There's probably a better way to say that, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. Okay, anything else in this section?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the one thing I love in this, twice it's mentioned that they would hear, that they would learn, and that they would fear the Lord.
Mhm.
But the little part that had kind of jumped out to me, where it says, gather the people, men, women, and little ones,
Mhm.
the outsiders within your town gates, again, so that they may hear, they may learn, they'll fear Adonai your God,
Mhm.
and take care to do the words. And it says, so their
Mhm.
children who have not known
Mhm.
will hear and learn to fear the Lord. So it's almost like this safety net, like
Mhm.
as if the parents, or for some reason, somebody's dropping the ball and they're not being taught like they're supposed to be taught. This is like a community now. We're gonna gather together as a community to make sure that we don't have a child left behind, or whatever
Yeah.
expression you wanna put
Yeah.
in there.
Mhm.
But it just every 7 years, and when I started sitting there thinking, like, what would a 7-year-old hear from this reading versus now
Right.
the knowledge of a 14-year-old, now the knowledge of a 21-year-old,
Mhm.
just that growing on of that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, to do that corporately, so that if within the household they're
Mhm.
not being taught the fullness of it,
Yeah.
the Lord established a way to make sure that every 7 years, the fullness of it all
Yeah.
is being shared, so that these people will fear him.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. Actually, it's funny, when I read that verse, I thought of you, because you're so good about bringing up these generational transfer to the children type of things. So yeah, I think it's good. I like your point about even as they grow, how they're going to experience it differently, because that's so true. I think that's true of all of us. And I think about reading a Bible story when I was a kid versus now. I'm like I always come back to Noah. Like, we tell this, like, the Sunday school story of Noah is like, oh, God's so kind, he saves all the animals and all the people, and then you read it and I'm like, this is really graphic and really kind of disturbing. As an adult, you're like, oh, this was a big deal. Like, there's a lot of evil things going on here. It's not just about animals and rainbows.
Yeah.
But that's good. Behold the goodness and severity of God.
Yeah.
And I think people like to overemphasize his goodness
Yeah.
or overemphasize his
Mhm.
severity, and we got to wrestle with both.
Yeah. No, I think that's true.
And that's what Sukkot is coming out, the season
Mhm.
of that too.
True.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And with the children too, I think it's like, because all the, going forward, the children, they haven't lived in this reality. They haven't lived in the wandering. They haven't lived in the generation of the Torah being given and this great deliverance and seeing these day-to-day acts of God, pillar of cloud by day, fire by night, this whole reality. And so it's like they need to hear the stories. They need to know their history. And I like that it's even, it's a corporate thing. So yes, they are, many of them, like you're saying, like, yes, it will, the ones who aren't hearing the stories at home will hear them there. But even if they are, when you hear them amongst, in that large corporate gathering, it kind of hits a little bit differently. So it keeps all the people reminded of the same story. They're all hearing the same thing. They're all reminded of their own history, which is, as we know, given all the commandments to remember through all of Torah, that remembering the history is important. Okay, let's keep going. So let's do like 14 through 18. So then Adonai said to Moses, behold, your time to die is near. Call Joshua and present yourselves at the tent of meeting, and I will commission him. Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves at the tent of meeting Adonai appeared in the tent in a pillar of cloud, and the pillar of cloud stood over the opening of the tent. Adonai said to Moses, "Behold, you are about to lie down with your fathers. Then this people will rise up and prostitute themselves with the foreign gods of the land they are entering. They will abandon me and break my covenant that I cut with them. Then my anger will flare against them on that day, and I will abandon them and hide my face from them. So they will be devoured, and many evils and troubles will come on them. They will say on that day, isn't it because our God is not among us that these evils have come on us? I will surely hide my face on that day because all of the evil they have done, for they have turned to other gods." Okay. So, this is an interesting repetition moment, because now we have Adonai telling Moses to bring Joshua to the tent, and Adonai is going to commission him. So back in verse 7, Moses called Joshua and kind of commissioned him. And now Adonai is calling him, and Adonai says he's going to commission him. And so they go, and again, we have several of these covenantal principles and these historical principles. We have the pillar of cloud, which of course is very familiar to them at this point, but it's specific to point out that this pillar of cloud is there, which is, this presence of Adonai. And then we have this foretelling of, you're going to be disobedient. You're going to follow other gods. You're going to break the covenant. You're going to do all these things. You're going to, and then Adonai will hide his face from them. So this is an interesting thing, especially in the midst of Moses kind of trying to exhort them into, don't worry, Adonai's with you, Adonai's with you. And then God's like, actually, I know what you're about to do. I know you. I know that when you get there, you're going to follow these other gods, and we're going to have some issues.
He told this to Moses, not everybody, right?
Right.
So yeah, so
Moses
this
who
is
was
being said to
about
Moses.
die.
You're right.
Moses who was about to lay down and end it,
Mhm.
and that's when God lays this on him.
Yeah.
Why?
Joshua was there though too, right?
Yes, it seems like Joshua was there, because it says Moses and Joshua went. But it specifically says Adonai is saying to Moses, so I don't know how we sort out fully what Joshua hears and what he doesn't. But it sounds to me that Joshua's there.
I think I would be if I was Moses, maybe, we were doing so good, and now you tell me this, I'm about to die, and, like, they're just gonna go do the same thing again?
But it
Yeah.
could also be an encouragement.
Yes, it could
Because,
be.
with all the frustrations and the stuff he dealt with, and to know that, okay, it wasn't just me and my leadership, it was, which I don't know that he would have thought that, but now it's like, okay, so this is a consistent thing that you're gonna have to deal with, and it's almost like you can release it and go, okay, God, now it's your deal. You've got to deal with this.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I didn't know Moses, but it's, speaking as a parent.
Yeah, well, later on, he talks about, Moses even ends up saying to the people that he knows that he's going to be rebelling because they've been rebellious even
Okay.
while they're with him. And we've had previous, and I didn't look up the references, but we've had some previous times when God has said, and when you turn away, I will have to cast you out of the land, but I'm going to bring you back.
Chapter 30 really
Yeah.
emphasizes that, where he gave
Okay.
kind of like, it's gonna go bad,
Yeah.
but I'm not gonna give up my
Right.
plan
Right.
and my purpose for
Right.
your people, so.
Right.
But to answer your question, I don't know the answer, first of all, but I think one reason, at least from my perspective, is that Moses was a very close friend. And that's something you would share with a very close friend. I mean, he's talking about his people committing spiritual adultery on him, so his heart is pained.
Yeah.
His heart is, I think, even suffering, just for seeing how his people are gonna turn on him. So I think he's sharing it with a close friend.
Yeah. Do you think there's also this reality of letting them know that because we have this covenantal reality and this covenantal promise of things are going to go badly, but I am going to bring you back. I'm not, just because, you're going to be cast out of the land at some point, and because I'm going to have, as he says here, turn my face from you, That doesn't mean I'm giving up my plan. That doesn't mean the story is over. Do you think there could be a possibility that even saying that is I don't know the right word to use, almost an encouragement of that just because things might look bad in a season doesn't mean it's over. To maybe, I don't know that they would, and I don't know that they have this mentality of not, I don't know that they're looking at the world with rose-colored glasses, that everything's gonna just be all,
Right.
you know, sunshine and butterflies when they
Yeah.
enter the land. Like, I don't know that they have that view, but even just like, I don't know, in some way there's this odd sort of reassurance that it's
Yeah.
like, no, things are gonna be really, like, things are gonna be bad for a while,
Right.
but that doesn't mean I'm breaking my promises to you. And that doesn't mean the story is over, that doesn't mean you won't come back, like, there's gonna be a process to this.
Yeah.
So you mean like COVID and vaccines and Afghanistan and all the stuff that we're currently having happen?
So,
Sure.
yeah, I think Moses is suffering too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
For
think
sure.
there's a sharing in the sufferings of
Uh-huh.
God
Mhm.
Yeah.
that Moses is experiencing. So I
Mhm.
think their relationship expresses an intimacy of sharing negative feelings together that are facts, but I think what you're saying is true. I think in the background music is this,
Mhm.
it's not always gonna be this way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's I don't know, I think there's a real intimacy actually
Yeah.
expressed here.
I think it's fairly complex.
I think because when I was reading this the other day, Stan and I were kind of discussing this, and I thought, well, part of you would think, okay, I've gone through the wilderness with these people, I've done all this thing, and you really would rather God say, hey, great job, everything's gonna work out great,
High five.
But yeah,
Right.
high five, right. So, but instead, when I was reading through this, it was the same thing I was getting. It was like the same way Moses poured out to the Lord when things were going rough with these people, the Lord also was sharing with him. And that is very strong verbiage. I mean,
Yeah.
these people are gonna prostitute. It isn't
Yeah.
just like they're gonna disobey me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do feel like that is that friendship thing
Yeah.
where, we've walked through a lot of this together, and
Yeah.
these people are still gonna do this. He's still gonna be faithful, but I think and that's why I also wondered, like, if Joshua's listening in the background on
Mhm.
this, so that Joshua also won't get discouraged,
Mhm.
Yeah.
like, man, I totally blew this,
Mhm.
this has been handed over to me, and look what these people did. So Joshua can't take that on himself like he failed as a leader,
Mhm.
if he also knows that Adonai has already said,
Right.
these people are gonna do this to me.
True.
So
Mhm.
to me, that's almost like a helping to build up the leadership, letting them know, we're gonna have problems here. I knew we were gonna have problems here. We're gonna have to carry this together,
Yeah.
But yeah, it was true. I was reading this, I thought, it's this end of his life. You wanna go, great job, high five, everything's gonna work out
Yeah.
awesome. And,
I know.
but the prophetic aspect of that, which we then, of course, see through the prophets and everything, that
Mhm.
it came to pass, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I always, these, like I said, like, this is kind of 31 is kind of the beginning of the epilogue of Deuteronomy. But these last few chapters of Deuteronomy, like, I don't know, like, my heart almost starts to just get really sad. I don't know, it's kind of almost like, if you binge watch too many TV shows like I do, it's like you become so attached to these characters, and then it's like, hey, you're like part of my life, and now you're gone. Like, I feel that way a little bit about Moses in a different way, but it's like that whole, like, we've been with Moses
Mhm.
through, since Exodus. And then, and he's gone through so much, and there's been, like even just, like, following Moses' life and watching his wrestle, and his moments of anger and frustration with the people, or even with God, but then coming to the end, and it's like, we're right here. The land is right there. But I'm gonna die here, and like the end of 34 is like,
Yeah.
when he takes them up and he lets them see, but he's like, you don't get to go.
Yeah.
It's just like this, like, difficult, I don't know, there's just something really difficult about it, that it's like, Moses is just, obviously, like, we should all be very thankful for Moses' life and the faithfulness that he did have, but he still didn't get to enter the land. I wrestled with God about that for a long time. I'm like, really? You really didn't let him go? Because I like the happy ending. I'm like, I don't actually care if it doesn't make sense. I want the story to end in a happy way. And for Moses, sometimes it feels a little bit like, oh, this is really hard. But then to see, I think the perspective is good of seeing, you know, God's heart is really sad too, of knowing what's coming. And there's a lot of almost grief in advance over, I love these people, but they're going to turn away. And so it's a complex series of emotions, because I think we tend to focus on that they're going to go in, they're about to go in. But also we have this really sad ending and loss from
And
Moses.
he had to be one of the ones on the Mount of Transfiguration.
Yes.
He did.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
I do like that Moses, though, got to die with the hope of
Yeah.
becoming prophet.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even the new covenant promises that God was sharing at the end of his life, in
Mhm.
Deuteronomy 30.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so he did get to die in hope.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So that's, like, it was hard,
Mhm.
but he got to die in hope, with a messianic hope, with a
Yeah.
hope of,
Yeah.
And then he got to chat with Yeshua on the Mount of
Yes.
Transfiguration. You know, how cool is
Yeah.
that, you know?
Well, and I think that's really good, and I think that that's something about Moses too. Moses kind of, for lack of a better term, Moses kind of plays the long game, right? Like Moses isn't really looking for his own self-fulfillment. Like he really is looking for the fulfillment of the prophecies and like this prophet to come, and
He is
the
the most
good of the
humble man
people.
on earth.
Hmm?
He is the most humble man on earth.
Yes.
As it was stated.
Like he really does just want the best for people, and I think that that's what's coming out here. It's like, please remember, God is with you. Like I think of like going back to kind of my example of like he's kind of the papa getting ready to send his kids out. He's like, remember, like yes, I've been with you, but it's really God. It's really Adonai who's the one who's been leading you, and he's still going to be with you. Like you just keep the commandments, do what he says, he'll be with you. And so I think I think that's unto kind of, like I said, like the long game of like he just ultimately wants a faithful people, regardless of, I think he is sad. I think there is like we've been talking about this mixture of this sadness, at the end of his life here, but I think his ultimate hope, like Rich was saying, is in a faithful people, to Adonai.
I remember reading this whole account when I was about, I guess, 15 or 16. It was the first time I'd gone through the scriptures. And I remember getting to that point where he couldn't go in, and what I realized was the seriousness that it is to be sure that you follow what he's sharing with you. And if you know, there's always that moment where you let your emotions run away with you, or you decide you're just going to do your own thing, and there are consequences. So it really alerted me as a teenager, and I'm still kind of living that way most of the time, to be alert at what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what are my attitudes now, and make sure, because the consequences can be far-reaching, like more than you realize at the moment when you're in the fit of anger or whatever, whatever's making you do what you shouldn't do, which was, he disobeyed God. God said, speak to the rock. He did do it.
Right.
So that seems like not a very important thing at the time, but the consequences of what we do and what we say and our attitudes can be generationally, I mean, they can just have far-reaching consequences. So
Yeah.
that's what I got out of it. It was like the fear of the Lord.
Yeah.
Really, the fear of the Lord gripped me at that point in a way I'd never experienced
Yeah.
before.
I think it's good, because I think that that's kind of Moses' message here at the end is the fear of the Lord. So
Yeah.
it's good. Okay. We're getting close. Let's look at 19 through 22. So because this is kind of a little bit of a shifting point in the narrative too, sort of. Now write this song for yourselves and teach it to Bnei Israel. Put it in their mouth so that this song may be a witness for me against Bnei Israel. For when I bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey that I swore to their fathers, and they eat and are satisfied and grow fat, then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will spurn me and break my covenant. Now when many evils and troubles have come on them, this song will confront them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten from the mouth of their descendants. For I know the intention they are devising this day, even before I bring them into the land that I swore. And that day Moses wrote this song and taught it to Bnei Israel. So this is kind of shifting to introducing the Song of Moses, which is next week's portion. That is kind of this almost summary song. So yeah, which is significant too, because poems and songs, of course, in the ancient world, you know, like we were talking about in ancient culture, it's so that they can remember it, so they can memorize it and they can have it and they can think it. But it's especially important that he has this song so that they can all learn it. Like it even says, like it's going to be, you know, he's teaching it to them so that they can sing it, say it, whatever, however you want to look at this. But it's also written, so it's like they have a hard copy. They can come back if someone, you know, accidentally switches up some words. They have the original to come back to. So it has a little bit more permanence of being written. Another interesting thing that this was from a commentary that I was reading that talks a lot about. He goes into a lot of the Hebrew word usage, and I thought this was really interesting. In verse 21, because again, he's talking about how they know that they're going to turn away and worship other gods. But in 21, in the TLV, the second part of that verse says, or the last part of that verse says, "For I know the intention they are devising this day, even before I bring them into the land that I swore." So that Hebrew word for that devising is not used very commonly. It's a little bit unusual. And it's actually kind of an allusion back to Genesis 8, which the TLV words it differently, but the translation that I was reading that makes this connection use the same word in 8:21 that says, "For the devisings of the human heart are evil from youth." Mm-hmm. So it seems like he's kind of looking back, like, you know, even back in Genesis, which Genesis 8 would be kind of in the Noah narrative, that the human heart has this kind of, unfortunately, has this evil intent that's kind of mirrored here, that unfortunately we still have, there's still some evil in the human heart, which I think is, I think I kind of read this as that it's something to be aware of, because they can choose, like, it's not, even though there might be this draw, that's this constant wrestle that I think that we all still experience. There's this constant wrestle that we have to give through. Where does our allegiance lie? Where is our, you know, are we going to follow the Lord? Are we going to follow our flesh, which will lead us to evil? And I think it's this acknowledgement that wrestle is there, and that he knows that it's been there from the beginning, since they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's been this wrestle, and it's still here. And so that's what this is coming out of, this inclination to follow these other gods and to turn away from the Lord is because there's that inherent wrestle within people. So I thought that was kind of an interesting connection back to an earlier part of the Torah as well. Anything else in this section?
How much of a tradition is still the Song of Moses? Because it's just mentioned in there that it's a tradition. So this song will confront them as a witness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't remember fully how much. I don't know how much it's.
I mean, I know we'll get into it next week, but the song, but.
Yeah, I mean, are you asking kind of like how much is it part of Jewish tradition to kind of recite
I mean,
or say
even
this
to
song?
today, I guess is what I mean.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that it's in some of the liturgies, but I don't know that it's in that I'm remembering right now. I could be wrong because I haven't read all that stuff in a while, but in like the daily or weekly liturgies. But it is So yeah, I don't know that it holds quite this strong place that probably Moses was intending.
Yeah, so it will not be
Because, you know, the
forgotten.
Shema and the Amidah and some things like that kind of have taken the central aspect of Jewish life, more so than this song, but I don't know. So I don't know. I don't have a full answer to that for you, sorry.
It doesn't sound like it is.
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah, it's not coming to mind, like, I don't, like,
Yeah.
like, as I think about, which I grant, I don't read through all the traditional liturgies a ton, but it's not coming to mind that it's something that's in there super frequently. Okay. Well, let's look at this last little section, and then we can, if there's any other burning questions or comments, then we can talk about those. Starting in verse 23. So then he commissioned Joshua, again, commissioned Joshua son of Nun and said, Hazak, be courageous, for you will bring Bnei Israel into the land I swore to them, and I will be with you. Now when Moses had finished writing the words of the Torah, of this Torah on a scroll right to the end, Moses commanded the Levites, carriers of the Ark of the Covenant of Adonai, saying, take this scroll of the Torah and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of Adonai your God. It will remain there as a witness against you, for I know your rebellion and your stiff neck. Indeed, while I am still alive with you today, you have been rebellious against Adonai. How much more than after my death? Gather to me all the elders of your tribes and your officials, so that I may speak these words in their ears and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For I know that after my death you will certainly act corruptly and turn aside from the way that I have commanded you. So evil will fall upon you in the latter days, because you will do what is evil in the sight of Adonai, provoking him to anger by the work of your hands. And then he introduces the song and goes into that. Okay, so we have more repetition in this last section. Again, we have Joshua being commissioned. Again, we have this Hazak, be courageous. Again, we have, this is just the second one, but we have this writing of the scroll and placing it with the ark. Again, we have this talk of rebellion and turning away from Adonai. And even, again, we have, which this is, you know, kind of the pattern of previously in Torah, the gathering the elders and the tribes so that Moses can share what God is saying. So there's a lot of repetition and restating some of this. Interesting that there's a third commissioning of Joshua within this one chapter. But again, the repetition is important because that means we're supposed to pay attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also just, we're not going to go into the full Song of Moses because we don't have time, and it's next week's. We'll get into it next week. But it's interesting that he says that he gathers the elders and the tribes so that he can speak the words, which you can kind of understand right in this immediacy of the text is the Song of Moses. And call heaven and earth to witness against them. That the opening of the song is, give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, let the earth hear the words of my mouth. So he calls on heaven and earth even within the song of starting it. There's several of these patterns too within the Torah of kind of this almost dovetail effect, where it's like he says he's going to call heaven and earth and then he does it. And even with this commissioning of Joshua, like we talked about, this be strong, be courageous, is in this chapter 3 times. But we always think of it like, at least that's kind of how I was taught, is that's in Joshua 1. But that's actually one of the things they point to for the continuity of how, when the Torah was canonized and the structure of it, is that there's this kind of, that's kind of the overlap and kind of the dovetail to show like there's intention in the Torah and the history going along there, which that's my Bible nerdy canonization. I think that stuff's really fascinating. But again, it's like this overlapping going on. It's like it should make you think back when you get to when you read Joshua 1. Oh yeah, Moses just said that 3 times. And so, just to point out, just another thing to watch for when you're reading the text. But anything else about this last section?
So what are we not getting if the Lord has to basically tell us 6 times in 2 chapters? I mean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the nature of humanity. I mean, you think of, raising children. How many times do you have to reinforce the rule and the pattern? Okay, after dinner, you put your dishes by the sink. How do you say that one time and they do it every day? No, you tell them every day. For months, probably. I don't know. But, you know, it's just, yes, fine. Did you have? Okay. No, you're fine.
Before I got into the Jewish history stream and started studying the Old Testament more, I'd never really realized that Moses told him when he was giving him the Torah, you're gonna disobey and go off for 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not four, he didn't say 400. Yeah, he did. But the fact that God told them when he was giving them the Torah, that they were gonna disobey it and be exiled from the land. I thought,
I know.
and then I say, oh yeah, how many times has the Lord told me something and I've done the same thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that reading this and reading in the context and reading the continuity of the narrative and seeing it, I think, for me anyway, one of the things that it has done for me is that it helps to reframe that, you know,
Yes.
that old thinking of the God of the Old Testament is this God of wrath, he punishes his people, and the New Testament God is this God of love, who's gracious. It's like, no, he's like we were talking about earlier, like, he's heartbroken over this reality.
Yeah.
He's like, but he's also told them, like, he's kind and fair, like, he actually has told them the consequences.
Right.
Like, if you're gonna align yourself with other gods, this is what's gonna have to happen, because you can't, you know, how Tom kind of says is you can't worship God and Satan.
Right.
He's like, you can't. I'm not like other gods. You can't just add me to the bunch. You worship me and you worship me alone. And if you don't do that, there are consequences for that. And so I don't think that he delights in carrying out those consequences. I think it grieves his heart deeply. And I think reading through this and even seeing, you know, this, like we've been talking about, kind of Moses' experience at the end of his life, I think if you really pay attention, I think you see that. Like, and I think that you can see, you know, as we're coming to the end of Torah, and if we think back through, which is why I love that there's so many things, even just in this one chapter, that take my mind back to Genesis, to Exodus, to the giving of, you know, to Leviticus, to different things of it. It's like, you think it helps me pull that thread all the way through of, like, he's been consistent, he's been faithful, he's been present, he's been with them, he's going to continue. Like, he's like, Joshua is going to lead you, but I'm going before Joshua. And so yeah, I think if we look at, the Torah and we look at even just, you know, Moses' experience, I think we can see God's faithfulness and God's kindness, which helps to rewrite that narrative that many of us were taught, that it's like, oh, he was really harsh to these people.
Yeah.
It's like, well, actually, they were doing really evil things.
Yeah.
He's harsh to the disobedient, because
Yeah.
I feel like there's a promised land for every generation. So I'm thinking about being strong and courageous back to Numbers 13 and 14 when the spies went into the land. So every generation has 12 spies that go into the land. And are you a 2 spy or are you a 10 spy? To where do you see the promises of God and how he wants to bless you and give your promised land for your generation? Or are you focusing on the giants and the challenges and all the things that could happen? And then I'm tying that into Hebrews as well, that they didn't enter their promised land or their rest of God because of their unbelief. And
So, kind of like, the word harsh is harsh for me.
Yeah.
It's the discipline of the Lord.
Right.
And just in the same way, any child that's being disciplined by their parent thinks that's mean or bad, or, you know. It's his goodness and his kindness. He, you know, otherwise you've got a God that doesn't really care about his kids and doesn't really care about what they're doing and doesn't really care if he has a relationship with them. And then to address Matt's comment about 6 times, you know, we have to talk about, I mean, we're looking at a group of people who are learning to self-govern, need to learn how to come under authority amongst their own people. You know, look how many times they fought Moses on things and God had to keep reminding Moses, it's not really you they're fighting against, it's me. But now we've got them, it's like, they've gotta go in and they've still gotta conquer this land. And if everybody thinks that I can set up my own authority to do this, and they don't wanna come under a level of authority that can organize and bring them together, they all wanna have their independent spirit type of thing. And we see that in this day and age too,
Exactly.
of those who don't wanna come under authority, don't wanna come into this grouping, and the Lord, he's even setting it up here. You know, there's people I have anointed that are gonna help you guys, keep you unified, keep us on track, get my plan done. And I think that's why it has to be keep reiterized and because they're just kind of at this point in time been so used to being slaves and like, woohoo, I have my
Yeah.
freedom and I'm gonna do my
Yeah.
own thing. And you can't fulfill the purposes of the Lord if everybody's doing their own thing.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's kind of what I feel like,
Yeah.
why he has to keep retelling them. I put somebody in charge here, would you listen to him because he's got my heart.
Yeah, and it's just that, I mean, and the reality is God's really trying to set Israel up to be a nation unlike other nations where he is the central authority, he is leading them, not a person or
Yeah, true. Set them up for success.
some other God. Yeah, and so in some sense, like, I think we can recognize the difficulty of this because they are being ordered and set up in a different way than any other nation around them. So if they look at any other structure of a nation, it does look different, even though there are some, well, we could get into all that, but it's a very different type of structure because he is with them. And so I think, like, kind of like what we've been talking about is like, he uses people, and he'll continue to use people, obviously, because the rest of the Tanakh, in the simplest terms, is a repetition of Torah.
Right.
Is the playing out of what happens, and you know, even when they get to the kings, it's like when you ask for a king, even though I want to be your king, these are all that, you know, it's going to be difficult, and this is why. But I will choose the king, and we'll try it out, and whatever. I'm oversimplifying, I realize that, but the point is that the rest of the Torah, or the Tanakh, is really a repetition of Torah and a continued case study, so to speak, of what happens when they're obedient and when they're not, and progressing through history and continuing to reveal different parts of the Lord, all pointing to the one who is a prophet like Moses, that they're looking for. And like I said, at the end of Deuteronomy, it says he hasn't come yet, which many understand that was a redacted comment when the Torah was canonized and the Torah was kind of closed. That so later on they're like, he still hasn't come. We still haven't found this prophet. He's still coming. All these other ones that they think might have been, they weren't. We're still waiting for that one, which is kind of a fun thing. But the point is, he's kind of passing off leadership. It's like, yes, there's still people in charge. Joshua is still the leader, but God is really the leader. And so it really is transitioning. It's this transitional moment, and it's, are they going to remain faithful? Are they going to continue to operate in this way that God has set it up and look to him as their leader? Or are they going to start looking for other people? So, do you have anything else you wanted to add, Rich?
No, I think that's right. I mean, the Lord's in the tabernacle. He's clearly the center. He's clearly the king, the leader. Yeah, he's.
Yeah.
So I think you're right on.
That's good.
I have one more thing. So I think there's lots of complementary perspectives on why so much repetition. But I think one perspective is God's just a really good communicator.
Yeah.
And I think also, it's actually honoring to the people too, because I think he expects that people will understand his core message through the repetition. So I don't see it as like a negative thing towards the people necessarily, even though it is a witness against them if they disobey. I also think it's honoring to the dignity of the people that they can they can understand his communication.
Yeah.
Because he's
That's good.
communicating in such an excellent way that they can pick up on the main themes through the repetition, which I think is just a general positive thing about how we should communicate when we're teaching.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
So.
really good. That's good. So, one final comment, because I think it connects. See if I can make this connection in the next 2 minutes. So this Shabbat that falls between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is called Shabbat Shuvah, or Shabbat Teshuvah, Shabbat of return, or Shabbat of repentance. There's just a couple different names for it. And I thought about just teaching about that, but I clearly didn't do that. But it's basically this, how I have kind of experienced it in years past, is that it's this Shabbat that it's a really good time to kind of cry out for those whose hearts are not turned towards the Lord, and
Yeah.
to call and to cry out and join the Lord's heart for Israel to turn toward Him. Because especially, and I think especially connected with what we've been reading, as like their hearts are going to turn away, they're going to worship other gods. Even just thinking the majority of Jewish people in the world are secular, don't have any thought about God. Many of them are atheists. They'll identify as Jewish atheists, which is a very strange concept in my mind, but it's a thing. Or just, kind of apathetic. And it's like, so I think that, like, even in light of this, I think thinking about this, as we're between Rosh Hashanah, of this prophetic celebration of this return of the King and the shofar blowing and this new year about to come to Yom Kippur, that, where we're going to have this emphasis on repentance and I don't know, I kind of love Yom Kippur because I think it's significant to feel the weight of sin, even though we know Yeshua has come and atoned for it, and that we have, we're not offering a sacrifice or saying these prayers to receive that, but I think that the recognition that sin has weight and power still, even though we know who's greater and who has more power, I think it's significant, and I think it can help us see the significance of Yeshua more. So as we're kind of in between that, these 10 days of awe, which are meant for self-reflection, meant for searching your heart, meant for looking for areas where you need to repent and ask for forgiveness, or need to forgive other people, and these kinds of things. I think that having this kind of Shabbat Shuvah, this Shabbat of return, kind of right in the middle of it is, I don't know, there's something about it, I don't quite know how to express it. And on your reading schedule, there are some scriptures, prophetic scriptures. They're short. I encourage you to read them if you haven't, to just kind of give you some language and give you some hope of looking toward the fulfillment of what is to come, and looking forward to the return of the Lord and the Jewish people coming back, and the nations along with them, to this, to seeing Yeshua as King. So, kind of as we're kind of wrestling with this, the people are going to turn away, Jew and Gentile are going to turn away from Him, that we have the hope of the return, and to take that kind of opportunity to drive our intercession unto that return of people turning back to their allegiance to the King. So Lord, we thank you again for Shabbat. We thank you for your scriptures, Lord. We thank you that we have these words written down, that we can study them, that we can discuss them, that we can learn from them. Lord, we thank you for your consistency and your faithfulness. Lord, I just ask that as during these 10 days of awe, that you would just bring to the surface anything that we need to repent of and to wrestle with and to forgive, Lord. I ask that you would just wash us clean, Lord. I just ask that you would just help us to see areas where we have, where maybe we have turned away and we need to turn back, Lord. And I just ask that you would draw those who have turned away from you. I ask that you would just turn them back towards you, Lord. I just ask that you would just be able to reach people's hearts, and that we would be able to communicate effectively with people, Lord, and that we would be able to just share your love and your character and your kindness, Lord, with the people around us, Lord. Lord, we just look toward your return with excitement, and also knowing that it's going to be difficult. The road is difficult, but it's worth it, Lord. So Lord, I just ask that you would just put, you would just fill us with hope and expectation in this season, and that would be what drives us, Lord, as we deal with all of the other things going on around us, and all the things that are happening now and all the things that are to come, Lord. I ask that hope and joy and love would reign over all of that, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.